I am Claire Mitchell, Doctor of Laws and King's Counsel.
And I am Zoe and Claire, Doctor of Laws, teacher and writer.
On the 8th of March 2020, International Women's Day, we launched the Feminist Witches of Scotland campaign. The Witchcraft Act, in force between 1563 and 1736, saw thousands of people, mostly women, accused and executed as witches in Scotland, in the country's biggest and most brutal miscarriage of justice. Our campaign had three aims: to get a formal state apology for those accused of witchcraft, to obtain a pardon for all those convicted, and to get a national memorial to remember those involved in the Witchcraft Act.
On International Women's Day 2022, the first of our aims was realised when First Minister Nicola Sturgeon issued a formal state apology to those accused as witches. The first formal state apology ever. We are currently working with politicians to ensure there is legislation passed to pardon those accused as witches, to change their status from convicted witches to those who ought never to have been prosecuted. We continue our work to obtain a national monument so those who suffered will never be forgotten. Join us as we speak to the experts on the witchcraft trials, both here in Scotland and further abroad, as we explore the history of women in Scotland and continue the cultural conversation of what it means to be a woman.
Well, hello and welcome to this very rapidly released episode. I mean, don't get excited, guys, okay? We've done 3 very quick episodes. I'd like to say that we're going to carry on with this level of striving, but I can't guarantee it, okay? So don't get too excited. But it's very nice to be with you in this new year, isn't it, Claire?
It is. It's absolutely amazing. I'm not going to refer to the bit between Christmas and New Year that you spoke about before, because you described it in the most biological way, and I'm really not into that.
Then I remembered, because somebody else pointed out to me, that it's not the perineum, it's the merineum. And obviously the joke is about the perineum and it being Christmas, which is a lot more acceptable. And because I am a puerile child at heart, I forgot the actual jokey part and just went with the biology part. So I'm very, very sorry to any listeners that I distressed with my biological detail. And, well, less to you. I mean, that's the, so to say, the tip of the iceberg with the things I say to you. But anyway, hello and welcome to 2026 at the Witches of Scotland podcast.
2026, our 6th year and our 80th episode, Zoe.
80, my goodness. I mean, who would have thought that you and I could keep talking for 80 episodes?
I mean, yeah, me and you could keep talking for 80 episodes, but who would have thought that we would have managed to get this many folk together to talk? I mean,
let's be under no illusion here, Claire. They're not listening for us, they're listening for the guests.
That's
true.
You know,
that's true. But today, whenever you listen to this, the episode that you're going to listen to, episode 80, as Claire said, is a good one. And the reason that we have decided to release it so quickly after the Merineum episode is that it's very relevant time. It doesn't matter if you do listen to this after the day that it comes out, but it is something that it'll become clear during the episode if you listen to it on the 5th why we wanted to get it out so quickly. So
there'd be no point out on the 10th.
No, not. I mean, it's still worth listening to, but there's just stuff that you can't action in the same way this year. But I mean, it could be the land of podcasts. You could be listening to this in 2032 in a nuclear bunker, and then it would still have relevance.
Listen to than this.
I don't know. It depends what you've got access to. What if we're the only podcast left? That's worse than No, never mind. Right. Okay. So before we go any further and we introduce our lovely guests, because we have 2 guests tonight, do we have anything that's been happening in the world, Claire?
1st of 2026. News.
I think we maybe need to professionalise that somewhat. No. We've got news today from 2 different parts of the world. Claire, would you like to kick off with your first piece of news?
Yeah, I was looking at something which came up on, I think it was Apple News that I was reading. And when I saw it, I thought, oh, this is quite interesting. It was a report done by a group of people, a group of economists, in fact, which I thought was quite strange, about the issue of witchcraft and how the economic factors involved. And the paper on witchcraft was done by economists Dev Nathan and Govind Kellar. And they said that, and they've put this in quotes because they're not meaning that this is correct, they're meaning this is what people think, that secret forms of worship by women have historically been labelled as witchcraft by others. And this is talking about particularly the area of India. It says these deeply entrenched historical beliefs that have been carried forward to the present are used to oppress women today, said activist and researcher Samar Bozu Mulnik. Today, stories of people being killed because they are suspected of practicing witchcraft appear with disturbing regularity across the country. And in fact, according to the National Crime Record Bureau data, 2000, more than 3,200 people, again, mostly women, have been killed. But what they actually say is that those records are probably vastly underrepresenting the amount of murders, they are murders, that take place because in lots of areas, particularly rural areas, they will not be being reported. What activists have said is that when women are killed in deep and rural areas, communities often keep quiet and word about the crime doesn't reach the police. So we talked before in another podcast about how all over the world these things happen time and time again. And it was explained that there was a pattern to who gets accused. And this will not surprise you, Zoe. Often it's women who come from a weak family. They're old, they're economically weak, and their husbands, if they have them, will often be alcoholics, i.e. somebody who isn't able to protect them perhaps in the same way. It also happens more frequently in areas where social and health facilities are failing. So I just read that and I was like, it's just exactly the same storybook that plays out time and time again. But the good news, I suppose, for the modern day is that there are a significant number of activists now working to try and address the problem of witchcraft accusations in India. And there are a lot of people working on it. The economists that I mentioned earlier, Nathan and Kellar, have got a book, Witch Hunts, Culture, Patriarchy and Structural Transformation. And they explain that you can't just get rid of these beliefs by outlawing them. The only way of eliminating those beliefs is to replace them with other beliefs or systems of explanation. So I thought that was really, really interesting. You can't just say, look, don't believe that anymore, it's stupid, because people will hold on to it until you give them another narrative or something else to speak to. So I thought
it's interesting. It'd be great if we could actually get them on the podcast. We'll see if we can get in touch with them and see if they'll come and speak to us. We have got somebody lined up at some point this year to talk to us about. So in the book, we've spoken to Leo Igwe. We also spoke to experts in Ghana. So we've looked at a few countries in Africa, bearing in mind that Africa is a continent and there's different things happening in different countries. Some African countries, this isn't an issue. Some other countries, it is an issue. But we have looked because we know people there, Africa in particular. But I'd like to sort of broaden and have a look, first of all, in Africa about belief systems. It's quite interesting what you're talking about there, about the idea of magic, and unpick a bit more about what Leo Igwe had said to us about anthropologists imposing the word witch onto African thoughts and belief systems. So we've got a historian who's going to come on and talk to us about magic in Africa, which I thought would be quite interesting. But then we'd also like to have a look at where it's happening in other countries. But it's amazing what you're saying there, Claire, and how that ties up with what we know has happened in Nigeria and Malawi and Ghana, and what happened in Scotland, like the similarity between them. Startling.
Just the same worldwide.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think one thing that people will sometimes say is, oh, women were just as bad for accusing other women. And I think it's worth having a little bit of we do talk about this a wee bit in the book, but a little bit of a chat about the fact that women will, of course, accuse other women if that's the system. And the system is patriarchal, where men are in charge and make the rules. But women are often participants in that, either because they believe it too, or because they sense that's the way to protect themselves, or they've got a grudge, or that they see that's a way to have power. I mean, these are just all human fallibilities.
Absolutely, but actually the most understandable, I think, fallibility is a lot of women named other women because when they were taken in and they were delirious, having been kept awake for days on end, they'd name people that they knew.
Yeah,
And
it's often
who was
that's often an argument that men will give us, that say to us, stop banging on about it. That tends to be the cut of their jib, tends to be women were just as bad for accusing other women. And like you're saying there, Claire, it completely neglects the fact, well, who said these names and under what circumstances? And we do know, as you've just said, Claire, that there was people that were being, tortured into giving up names. So, I mean, it doesn't feel very reliable to me, in many ways. But it'll be interesting to sort of cast the net a bit wider this year and look at what's happening worldwide. So we're staying abroad. We're staying outside of Scotland for the next piece of news, which is something that happened towards the end of November in Italy. So deputies in the Italian Parliament voted at the end of November to unanimously voted to introduce the crime of femicide, which is the murder of a woman motivated by gender. And that is going to be a distinct law which will come with a life sentence punishment. Now, what's interesting about this is that there's very few countries that seem to have femicide on the books. Yes. So there was a terrible murder in Italy of a woman called Giulia Caccettin. I'm sorry, Italians, if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. Her ex-boyfriend killed her, and she was only 22, and this happened in November of 2023. The murderer, the ex-boyfriend, Filippo Turetta, stabbed her to death and then dumped her body. It was just absolutely terrible. People were very upset about it, quite rightly, and it was in the news until he was caught. And apparently it was the response of Julia's sister, Elena, that has stayed in people's mind, because she discussed and described the murderer as what she called a healthy son in a deeply patriarchal society. And people in Italy came, took to the streets. And we know that the Italians will absolutely do that if it's something they care strongly about. We've seen that happening of late with what's happening in Gaza. So Italians took to the streets and demanded change. And so 2 years on, MPs have voted for this law. It's been debated apparently a long time, and it's now one of the few places that sees femicide as a crime in and of its own self, which I think is really important. We need to think about, well, why are women being killed, and what is the society in which we live that leads some men to do these murders against women? And it doesn't take long to be on the internet to get a sense of what sort of disregard many women are held in. It's rape threats, it's murder threats, that kind of thing is really, really common, and at the most sort of innocent side of it is men, this whole idea about judging women and giving them sort of like numbers and standings and all that kind of rubbish. And it's something that we've talked about a lot over the last few years, about what's happening in schools, what's happening, on the internet, and what that then means for women. And I think that if it's named as femicide, then it means that we're really discussing that, rather than just kind of like, oh, it was a murder that happened because they fell out, or, it was an argument that escalated. The fact is that you're more likely to get murdered by your intimate partner than by anybody else, aren't you, Claire?
Absolutely. And I often find it strange when the word domestic is used.
Yeah.
It doesn't really sit correctly with what a lot of these are. It's like, what is it saying when it's domestic? Is it tied to the woman's role in a home? Here is a thing, Zoe. Remember right back at the very start, and I said, bear with me a few weeks, I've got an idea. And you said, hear me out, hear me out. Wouldn't it be amazing if we asked our MPs to bring in a law on femicide?
Yeah, that is an idea. I mean, I wonder what the reception to that would actually be in the UK, what it would be in Scotland.
Well, it would have to be Scotland, because our law is different from that in England. But the bill on misogyny did not go through for various reasons, not to do with the merits of it. I think probably more to do with the timing of it. But why not? Why don't we ask our MPs in the new year to do that?
Yeah, I mean, why isn't there? Why don't we follow Italy's lead? Because I think it's not just Italy, it's also Cyprus, Malta, and Croatia. They're all EU member states. They've got a legal definition of femicide in their criminal codes. And I think, it would make sense if we obviously had it too. The Italian law applies to murders which are described as being an act of hatred, discrimination, domination, control, or subjugation of a woman as a woman, or that occurs when she breaks off a relationship or to, quote, limit her individual freedoms.
Yeah, why not just name it?
Yeah.
Why not just name it? I mean, yes, we have the crime of murder. That's a given. But it is important that we highlight what's actually happening. And murder isn't cutting it.
Yeah.
And, if it can go down, if it doesn't go with the aggravation of misogyny, why not? Why not we simply say femicide? I mean, the rates in the UK are that, and this I think is taken from, I can't remember where the Scottish Women's Aid, I think, has got a link to the femicide census, which I've just looked at. I think in the UK, one woman is killed every 3 days by a man.
And I think the thing is here, it's great to get it on the legal books, but more importantly than that, it can't be one of these things that's like, right, we've put it into law, that's the job done. I mean, really, the bigger issue with this is that we actually try and change the way in which women are viewed in society. That we talk about, well, why do some men, feel that they can do this with women? Why do they feel entitled when a relationship breaks up, which is what happened in the case of that poor woman in Italy, that they broke up and he killed her because, she wouldn't carry on the relationship. We saw that horrible case, I don't know if it was last year maybe or the year before, where the ex-boyfriend came back and killed the ex-girlfriend, her sister and the mother. And there's this sense of entitlement, and we really need to be digging down into that with children from when they're tiny about the relationship between the sexes and what relationships are, and understanding that somebody breaking up with you doesn't mean you've got any kind of an entitlement. And some people will be listening to this and they'll go, well, only a disturbed person would do that. But we've got a pretty high percentage of disturbed people looking at the stats. That's something that really needs to be talked about. And really, it's about regulation. It's about emotional regulation.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, if you go on to look at domestic abuse statistics, they are horrifyingly high, and they're also on the rise.
It's really scary. You would have thought by this time.
Yeah.
And I think again, there's a parallel to be drawn there with the witch trials, that that people are feeling less and less secure at the moment, and maybe then that gets played out in intimate relationships, where if a man doesn't feel like he's got control in his work life, maybe, or he feels like he's being demeaned in some way, he'll take it out on his female partner, and it was ever thus. But I wonder how much it's tied into sort of financial insecurity and like social insecurity, and this whole idea about the male loneliness epidemic. It's just interesting to me, but also like annoying.
Hang on, I'm reading a red flag, because if we start talking about the male loneliness epidemics, we will not have enough time for either of our two guests.
No, it's true. Let's move on. So our guests today are very interesting. And one of the reasons that I picked that story about what's happening in Italy is obviously, naturally, it's incredibly interesting. But our first guest is an Italian who's going to tell us about some Italian traditions. Hello, we are so happy to welcome to our podcast today a guest that we have been literally chasing across the internet for what feels about 10 years now. Every time I get in touch, I say, how about then? And then I forget to follow up, and then you're really busy, and then it's been a long time, but I think it's going to be worth the wait, guys. So today I'm delighted to introduce to the show Debora Moretti, who's going to talk to us about something that we've never talked about before. So that's very exciting. So Debora, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here.
We're so happy to get you on here. Can you tell the listeners what it is that your speciality is and what you're talking about, rather than me mangle an intro? If you tell us what you're talking about today.
I am an archaeologist and a social historian. So I started as an archaeologist. I studied in Italy, and then I moved to England, and I was an archaeologist. I practiced as an archaeologist, and then I decided to move my interest, which is the evidence of magic and ritual practices in archaeological context, into the realm of history. Therefore, I decided to do a PhD on witchcraft, and I contacted Professor Ronald Hutton with my proposal, and that was that. And I was awarded my PhD in history in 2018. And my PhD research is on historical Italian witchcraft, and I worked on two archives. One is the Roman Inquisition archive, so the document of the trials for witchcraft in the Roman Inquisition in Tuscany. And then I'm now working with Professor Owen Davies on a project which is called Alternative Healers. So it's more modern, but we are dealing with all those alternative healers that operated outside of the medical orthodoxy, and that includes cunning folk, really all of them, charmers and so on, astrologers and so on. So
we'll probably need to get you back on again to talk about that if you'd like to, because that'd be so fascinating.
Project. It is truly a great project, and it's important because it shows you that the witchcraft accusations did not really end with the end of the witch hunt. On into the 19th century and even early 20th century.
That's fascinating, because I love Owen's work, because one of the things that Owen is great for, I've now left Twitter, so I don't know if he's still bravely battling on Twitter, but he was great on Twitter for saying to people, no, that's not true. No, that's not true. This is the actual facts. And even when people would kind of keep going to him, no, I think you'll find, he was kind of like, well, I think this is my career and it's my area, you know. Yeah. He's very good.
You know, calmly refuting the tide of rubbish on Twitter.
Yeah, it's absolute nonsense. But anyway, that sounds like a really fascinating project. But what you're going to talk about tonight is specifically...
It is the tradition of the Befana. The Befana is a folk tradition, but it has really ancient roots. So let me give you an idea of how I remember the Befana tradition when I was a child. Is one of my favorite memories. So the Befana tradition is connected to the Epiphany, so that's the 6th of January. But the Befana would fly across the night sky on the night between the 5th and the 6th. And if children had been good children, she would deliver gifts. And usually the gifts were put into socks, which were hung on the fireplace or the wood burner stove or the windows. And we did have that. So me and my brother would go to bed really excited the night of the 5th with our socks hanging from the firework beam. And I would pray that I had been a good girl, because sometimes the Befana would leave coal rather than sweets or little presents.
We have that in Scotland too, the coal angle.
Deborah, did you ever get coal, or was it always sweets?
I have, but it was sweet coal, so the shops would actually sell.
There's a trick.
It would look like coal, but it was a sweet, so you would get.
That's so sweet.
The sweets, anyway. So
can you tell us what the Befana was?
The Befana, even now, it's an old lady, and it's a witch figure. Is not a witch, but it is a witch figure. So even in modern tradition, it's an old lady. There is a beautifying tradition which has nothing to do with the Befana. So you would see little cards or memes of a pin-up Befana, but that's not the tradition. The tradition
the hot witch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's move away from that. The
Yes.
Befana, it's an old lady, and usually it's a quite weathered old lady with a long nose, the warts and all that. And it has been like that for centuries. It comes from, as I said, from really ancient roots, but the tradition that I grew up with is more of a Christian tradition.
Right.
So I'll start with that, and then I will take you back in time.
Okay.
So there are two main Christian traditions regarding the Befana, and the first one, it's basically a Christian story that it begins at the time of the birth of Christ, of course. It says that the three wise men wandering in Judea somewhere stopped to ask for water to a lovely elderly woman. She was fetching water from the well near her cottage. She offered them water, and they invited her to join them for their quest. So the three wise men were going to see the newborn king. She declined because she was very, very busy, and so they left. Now, yeah, I know.
She's like, the three wise men, they're guys with nothing better to do at this time of year than go on a quest for the baby. This woman was a busy woman. She had things to do.
Yeah, exactly. So she was really busy in her chores, so she didn't bother.
To be fair, Claire, also, this is before Jesus was known and was famous.
Yeah.
Like, so,
I still
she would know what she's missing out on.
But I still like the fact
Exactly.
like there's these wise men roaming about with nothing better to do, and they come across an old woman. She's like, "Look, I'm really busy at this time of year. It's dark. It's cold."
Also, Claire, if I could point out to you, how many men have we come across in our lives that would describe themselves as wise men, and we would immediately make our excuses because we were too busy? Just saying. Sounds like a standard female experience.
Do you think they were king bros?
Yeah. If they'd had a podcast, they'd have had a podcast.
Yeah. So as soon as they left, she started thinking, and she said, "Oh, they looked quite regal, and of course they had the star illuminating their path." So she stopped and think, and she said, "Right, I think they were on a real important mission." So she decided to follow them. So she put in baskets the toys, the clothes from her deceased child. She added fruit, nuts, and other things. She put the baskets across the back of a donkey, and then she put more on a sack on top of her shoulders, and she tried to follow the wise men.
Debora, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. As a mother of three, she's the one that started this, the enormous amount of labour women have to do at Christmas. Yeah. So all the foods, all the presents, the transport, everything, all done. It's the woman that does it all from the get-go.
Also, can I point out that the King Bros brought 3 useless presents for a baby in a manger?
Yes, and that, in fact, that is in the second Christian tradition I'm going to tell you.
Oh,
this first one, she tries to reach them. She gets lost. She travels all over the place. She cannot find this new baby king. She ends up in a seaside town. She asks some sailors how to find it. Nobody knows what this is. And one of the sailors says, "You should go to Rome because there are many kings in Rome." And somehow she ends up in Rome, but she cannot find it. The tradition says she even spoke to Caesar, but nobody knew about this new newborn baby king. So in despair, a little bit distraught, she decided to go back home. And traveling back, she went across beautiful countries, beautiful lands, but she saw the suffering of some people, especially some poor children, and she decided to gift them those gifts that she wanted to give to Jesus. And that's how one of the tradition tell us how, the Befana tradition started. There is another one, a less common Christian origin story of the Befana, which is collected from oral tradition in the Emilia-Romagna area, which is slightly center north of Italy. And this story is different because the Befana, was there at the birth of Jesus. She was the old lady that would tell him nice stories about, humanity. And in receiving many gifts, Jesus decided that those gifts did not interest him. He wanted the gifts from the heart. So it was just the goodness of people that he wanted. So he instructed the Befana to give the gifts given to him, to give them to the good children of the world. So in this story, the Befana does not arrive too late to see Jesus. She is there already. She is punctual and she is precise, and she is actually helping Jesus in a mission. And in fact, some tales tell us that she was not officially, but she was considered Jesus' grandmother. Oh. So you see, so there are two kernel of Christian tradition referring to the Befana. In this tradition, she is good, she is connected to Jesus, and she does good. And this Christian tradition, you find it already completed towards the end of the 19th century and then in the early 20th century. But there is a folklore tradition that is slightly different. So what we have seen is the children's Befana, the one I grew up with. The other Befana I was not aware of. And this one is for adults, really, and it has a darker side. It's sinister, sometimes malevolent, and affects not just children, but also adults. And this type of Befana, as I said, we find it really in the folk tales. So they're not tales for children, they are tales for everybody. And this malevolent Befana is most prominently found in not all across Italy, but in specific regions. So you find her in the northeast, in the Veneto region. You find her at the opposite end of the boot in Apulia. You find her in Sicily, and you find her in Tuscany. Now, in these areas, the Epiphany Eve, so when the Befana arrives, was not only a night of celebration, but also one of dread. In these areas, in fact, like, for example, in Cadore, which is in the Veneto region, near Belluno, you find the Befana, which is there called Redodesa. She bestows gifts, but she also brings a sort of metaphorical horror, fright, death, cruelty, fear, nightmares, trickery, betrayals, and according to some accounts, folk accounts, even cannibalism. So you see, it's a completely a different side of the Christian tale. Yeah. Redodesa did not travel alone, and this is a point that is important, and you will see later when I go a little bit further into the roots of it. She was accompanied by a terrifying entourage, the 12 Redodesegot, who punished and frightened anyone they encountered as a punishment for not being good people. And in an almanac of 1885, it is described basically her as a woman who announced her presence on the Epiphany Eve with a clanging of chains and it warned, woe to anyone who has not removed the chains from the kitchen fire or left the toe in the distaff. And in those regions, she basically was a punisher for those people who did not clean the houses or did not respect certain rituals. And regarding the distaff, this is quite interesting, because she would carry a distaff, and she would threaten to spin the entrails of those women who carried on spinning woolen flaps on the Epiphany Eve, and that was not allowed. And
oh my God.
Yeah.
So this is a woman being used to keep other women in line for domestic sluttery and also working when they shouldn't be working.
I mean, you can't
Bloody hell.
You have to stop working and also simultaneously continue working.
Claire, you'd be done in.
I'd be done. I'd be done.
I'm not saying about domestic sluttery per se. I'm thinking more from the point of view that you don't stop working. So the Befana would come in and...
Also domestic sluttery. I mean, I am chaos on legs.
True. She might bring you in as one of her punishers.
It's possible. I was thinking, well, do you know what I was thinking all the time that you were talking to us about it, is that when we looked at the witchcraft trials in Scotland and we looked at the Catholic traditions pre the Witchcraft Act, the history of witchcraft and the history of Catholicism was all interlinked. Like, there are parts of it that touched other parts, and it seems like a lot of the stories got mixed up in translation. Is that how the Befana, do you think, these differences and changes happened, where they were parts of it bringing in bits of religious, like the 12 people that she had with her, the disciples? Are those the sort of things that, the same sort of ideas that are all getting mixed up together?
So yes, you're right. So of course, in the witchcraft trials of the Roman Inquisition, in the the volumes or the guidelines that the inquisitors followed, you can see that there is an exchange of ideas, myths, folklore, which allowed the exchange of traditions between the inquisitors, the accused, and the accusers. So there was like a circle of influencing each other. So of course, the inquisitors had, demonic witch is absolutely a theological creation.
What does that mean?
It means that so the witch that was persecuted and prosecuted by different tribunals, including the Inquisition, was an intellectual creation that was based on theological beliefs. It's the demonology that created that witch figure, which did not.
So just to clarify, so what you're saying is that the witch of the, that was persecuted during the witch that was persecuted during the Inquisition times, that was something that came from like biblical reading and ideas from the Bible that would be backed up by the church, which was the same in Scotland, obviously. Yes. But that this other idea preceded that before Catholicism was in place. So this is a much, much earlier.
Not quite.
No.
So if you look, for example, I work on Italian material. So if you look at witchcraft accusations in medieval times, you don't find the demonic witch that you then find from 1450 onwards.
Why did that shift then?
It's exactly that period. So we have. There is an evolution from fear of magic, in fact, fear of ritual magic, which stems from, the 12th century and then later on with the Renaissance. So the power that be was fearful of ritual magic. Ritual magic was not the magical practices of the folk. The ritual magic was practiced by learned, well-to-do men who had not only economic power but also knowledge. In fact, ritual magic, to be able to perform ritual magic, you had to be able to read. You had to be able to buy certain books, whereas folk magic
was for anyone.
was not learned. It was, you didn't have to be able to read. You
was
didn't
folk
need to be educated.
So folk magic was passed down from person to person.
Yes.
Was folk magic used more by women, or was it equal men and women that used folk magic?
Good question. So whereas in ritual magic you find men, because women were not educated
Didn't have
enough.
They were too busy.
Yeah. In folk magic it was both men and women. So
Okay.
that's the difference.
Right.
So the church in the 13th century, we are in a period, so we start with the Crusades, and then we have the Crusades against heresy. So we're talking about the Cathars, the Waldensians, and the Inquisition was originally created to fight these heresies, so the Cathars and the Waldensians. Once that problem with heretical Christian groups ended, then there was another fear, and that was the fear of ritual magic. So the kernel of that, let's say, kick-started a century later, the witch hunt, is heresy. So basically, where before, yes, we had magical practitioners who got in trouble with different tribunals for different reasons, the heretical element was not there, where after that, the witch was a heretic. And not only was a heretic, the witch had made a pact with the devil.
Right,
So
that's what I was going to ask.
You don't have that before that.
Right.
So that's why I say it comes from demonology rather than folk tradition.
So just to spool back a wee bit, before we had the heretical angle to it, and people got into trouble for folk magic, was the idea of a witch around then? Or did the idea of the actual witch come later?
There are traditions of the witch, but it's not the demonic heretic.
So not evil witches. So did witch have a neutral sort of a reading initially?
So if you think of magic from antiquity to the medieval period, magic per se was not considered evil. Magic was a neutral power, if you like. It was the ultimate goal of the magical practitioner to put a spin on, what was considered good or bad. In Roman times, certain magical crimes were persecuted and prosecuted, and people were killed for that, but the crime had to be real.
What do we mean by a magical crime?
So if I was a powerful service magician and I caused a storm, and because of my storm, people died, and that was proved, I was a criminal. So,
okay. So the
questions.
Okay. So what you're saying is that if it was said that somebody had caused something by witchcraft, and that thing that they'd caused was a crime, like the murder of someone, then they could be prosecuted.
Yes.
And the belief was that magic was real, so that was already a given. It was already
absolutely. Not everybody believed in magic. If you think of Pliny the Elder or other classic authors, they didn't really believe in the power that humans had to make magic, but many others did. Yes.
Cool.
Where did they think they were getting their power from?
Well, that's the problem. So if you look at the classics, the power was in nature itself. So it was the mastering of of nature, of natural magic, the power that comes from nature,
but not God. Is this pre?
No, because then that would bring you into the heretical element. You could not. The problem that started at the end of the medieval period was the idea that certain people believed to have powers similar to God. So the church would say, well, no, they're not your powers. It's the devil that gives you the illusion that you have those powers. So
that's when the devil's really starting to get involved in things. And as you're saying, that kind of sowed the seeds.
Yeah, you cannot approach the onset of the witch hunts, so just before the witch hunt started, so all that the creation of demonology associated with witch hunts, without understanding the importance that demonology was a thing already existing, the importance of demonology, the impact that demonology had on witchcraft. So basically, magical practices became malevolent practices and then became witchcraft practices. There is a certain...
So similar to here. And what sort of time period are we talking about in Italy?
So we are looking, there are some, I say amazing, but they are terrifying. Really important trials already in 1427,
right.
28. So they are quite early.
Yeah, and then did it quieten down for a bit and then really have a big peak, or did these kind of rumble on from that period?
Yeah, there are peaks,
like here.
And they change. Yeah, they change it. They change depending on where you are. So yeah, different regions, different approaches.
Is there an idea now? So my understanding of Italy, it may be wrong, but my understanding was that Italy, up until like not that long ago, was like really separate places, wasn't it? It wasn't like one unified Italy, which I suppose explains why in some areas the Befana is looked at and in other areas it's not taken the same way. They're all kind of like separate countries, weren't they, essentially?
Exactly. So Italy came together politically in 1861, so before... I think.
It's so recent, really.
Yes. So before were, different regions. That's why witchcraft studies are so fragmented in Italy. Because each region had its own, either canonical law or legislation, or certain Venice cohabited with the Roman Inquisition, but they were not the same. So the legal entity who fought witchcraft in Venice, for example, it was not only the Roman Inquisition. There are other tribunals, and that's why you have different.
Are they treated then as separate areas of research then, or do you treat it as right? Okay, so is there an idea of how many there might have been in total, or are there absolutely not?
This is
far too messy.
I'm trying to finish my book on Italian witchcraft, and it's so difficult because you have just the Roman Inquisition. So you have the central Holy Office in Rome, the Palace of the Inquisition, which is the one that still holds some of the archives, and then it had like 30, maybe over 30 tribunals across Italy. But it's not the Roman Inquisition, only the Roman Inquisition that had sovereignty over witchcraft accusations. You had secular tribunals as well, and they had their own archives. So it's incredibly fragmented. So I could not give you an idea of how many hundreds or thousands of people, because it's it's impossible. Some archives have not even been located yet,
So when we talk about Germany being, having these figures and Scotland being the highest per capita, we don't actually know if Italy would knock them both out of the park with statistics.
I don't think it would, because as you know, the Holy Roman Empire, so the Germany area, the Central European area, and Scotland, that's where you had the I would say most brutal persecution.
I mean, it's not really a like a championship title that I'm that keen to hold on to. Like I wouldn't, it wouldn't be pretty terrible. But so when you're looking at Italy, then is there a region in what we now think of as Italy? Was there one particular region that was particularly, focused on witches? Or is there one area that really, like, was Venice? Did Venice not really mind? Were they like cooler and a bit more magical generally?
So you have to think Italy, if you like, in 3 or 4 blocks. So the southern Italy, the Kingdom of Naples, and then Sicily, and Sardinia, they were under the Spanish Inquisition, but they also had separate tribunals, and there the figure of the demonic witch is less predominant.
Okay.
Then you have the Alpine region, so the northern of Italy, and that follows with the Central European idea of the demonic witch. And then you have the center, which is milder because the tradition of the demonic which is less present. And what do I mean by that? Is the idea of going to the Sabbath, going to the nocturnal gathering. You can see where the Sabbath tradition took hold more strongly, and that's, as I said, is the northern and Alpine region, and then is somehow lost in the central area, and then is very not very present in the southern part.
Did the South have more like sort of an influence from, like, say, North Africa because of travel, and did that have like a different kind of mythology? Were there different folk traditions there?
Yes, you find that in Sicily, for example. You find that also in the main part of Italy, and it's associated with Arabic people of Arabic culture, or people of Jewish culture.
Yeah. So like really different myths that are all blended together because of conquest and travel, and so interesting.
It's amazing that I read, don't know whether this is true or not, but it's an interesting idea that in every culture there is an idea of a witch, which is usually an older type of woman with some kind of magic for good or for bad, and also dragons. Don't know. I don't know.
Really?
Can I ask about the Befana? In modern day Italy, is the Befana still observed, and are there any cultural events that go on around the Befana?
Are good question.
Do for Befana, and should we be doing them on the 6th of January? Is my question.
Right. So
should we fly to Italy? Yes, we should.
Yes, let's go, Zoe.
Let's go to Italy.
Deborah, do you fancy? You can take us.
Yeah. So I still have a little ritual, which I follow on the night of the 5th. So first and foremost, I'll clean my house on the 5th. So I take down my Christmas decorations. Clean the house. Yeah, because that is the 12th night. So it's important to take down your Christmas decorations. I clean my house, and then I prepare a little dish with some food and a little glass of wine or some other spirits, because in the tradition of the Befana, you would leave some food for her and her donkey.
Hang on, I've heard this story before. You leave a little bit of drink for her and a wee carrot, is that right?
Yes.
For the reindeer.
Isn't it funny? Isn't it funny, the similarities across stories, like those funny little points that are sort of echoed through time? So
Yeah,
you
but
do that on the night of the 5th then?
Yes,
So
yes.
everything's taken down and cleared away,
Yeah.
and like you're going into the next phase of the year nice and clean and
Yes.
organised. Okay.
Yeah. This is like a private celebration. As I said, other private celebrations would be to put the stockings and then, hope that she will leave you something. There are public celebrations as well, especially in my region, in Maremma. For example, there is a public tradition that is called Befanata, and is actually my parents at some time in the past did take part. So the Befanata is like a procession in which generally a man dresses up as the Befana, because the Befana had to be grotesque and ugly. So, and my dad, for example, would dress up as the Befana, and the Befana would have her husband, the Befano, and a group of people called the Befanotti, which would represent her retinue or her children. And they would carry musical instruments, and they would move from house to house, or school to school. And sometimes they did have the donkey. Sometimes they still have the donkey with the Befana. And so they would parade themselves through towns and villages, distributing small gifts to children and singing traditional songs. And until very recently, this was largely a rural custom, mainly, but you would find it also in towns. And the group traveled from house to house, performing in exchange for food or drinks. The collected provisions were later on redistributed, if you like, reflecting the structure of all the itinerant begging rituals, which you also have in Britain. The other major public ritual would be the burning of the old woman, the burning of the
Hang
vecchia
on.
or vetch.
Hang on,
Okay,
things are quite nice up to this point.
It's taken a very. I mean, I was objecting
Presents.
to the fact that she had to be ugly, but it seemed all relative.
Yeah, you have to see what the Befana represent. She is the supernatural entity that represent the deep winter, the end of a cycle.
Oh, okay.
So she has to be. So not only she is the deliverer of good notions on how to be a good person, but she also represents the end of a cycle. So the fact that she gets burnt, so her a puppet of her gets burnt, and her burning, it's divining the good success of the new cycle. It's really important and telling.
Okay.
So it's not just, as I said, we cannot. The Befana is not a witch.
Yes.
It's
So it's not
considered a
burning
witch figure.
Yes.
But she is much, much more.
No, we see that.
Of,
it's not taking a woman who they're said she's a witch and then burning her. She is a much more nuanced character. And we have been doing the 12 nights of Christmas, where we
The intentions.
an intention every night, and we burn it. And that's just to sort of release it to the world. It hasn't got a negative connotation by burning something. So this is the same idea.
No. It's like, let me, for example, Carlo Ginzburg. Okay, he has published quite a lot. So he has published quite a lot on witchcraft, of course, and his studies have been so very important. Now, he has never devoted a single work exclusively to the Befana, but his influential studies of popular religion and folklore offer a very powerful interpretation lens on the Befana. Ginsberg situates this figure. It's like the survival of a pre-Christian agrarian right. He notes that it could be related to the ancient female divinities, connected to fertility, connected to the agricultural cycle and the seasonal renewal, reimagined over and over through time. And for example, he observes that in Italy, the Befana is what in the Germanic tradition is perchta or holder. So they are figures that represent so much more than just a witch figure. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does.
Yeah.
And I actually was reading about an Easter festival that takes place where the straw effigy of a woman is burnt. Is that the Befana they're burning again at Easter?
If not quite, because the Befana belongs to a very specific liminal time, which is the 12 nights. She brings. What's that saying? There is a saying that basically the Befana comes at night and brings an end to the 12
darkness.
nights.
Yeah.
It's associated with a very specific liminal time. She could be associated with a wild hunt, for example. I don't know if you know much about the wild hunt.
No.
So the wild hunt is a supernatural. How could I? A nocturnal procession.
Okay.
And it's pan-European, so it's not just Italian. In fact, I think the only wild hunt element that we have in Italy is actually probably the Befana. The wild hunt was this supernatural procession seen or heard moving across the night sky or the forests or the roads, and they would and each procession had a hero or a god or goddess or heroine taking the lead.
Right.
So you have Harlequin, you have Redodesia, you have Perchta, you have Holder, who led their retinue across the night sky. And it was a dangerous thing to see them because they would entice humans to join the retinue of the wild hunt. And I mean, in Germany or the Germany area, you would have Woden leading the hunt. In Scandinavia, you would have Odin leading the hunt. As I said, in France, you would have Harlequin. So you know. It's and this has medieval origins, absolutely. So scholars like Ginsberg or Cardini or Professor Paolo Portone, they think that the Befana is one of these supernatural beings leading the wild hunt, and the wild hunt is specifically associated to the 12 nights period, because that is a liminal period where the world of the dead interlocks with the world of the living. So, as I said, it's a liminal
In
period.
times.
So,
Our version of that happens around Samhain, and they're called Slua. That's the night procession with the fairies and I don't know if it's witches actually. I think it's fairies. But anyway, yeah, that's the Scottish version of it.
It's this ongoing thing that we've got as humans, isn't it? Is that we need to explain things, and we need to get through dark times with stories, and we need to always, you know, I think, right, there has to be some sense to this. We have to make sense of this, but we also use it so much as a social corrector, don't we? This sort of idea, like, you must behave, like law's not enough. And maybe now we rely much more heavily on law, but the idea that communities would kind of self-police to an extent, you know, and initially before the religion that we think of now, the Christian religion that's across so much of Europe, before that, it's a much earlier iteration of that. You know, keep your house clean, you know, behave yourself, give to the poor, you know, be helpful to a traveller, you know, all those kind of stories. We've got them there. But I love the fact that we as humans cannot help ourselves from having this nasty edge, this darkness, you know, like behave yourself, otherwise people will be cross with you. And maybe some cannibalism, you know, that there's this thing, there's this real, because we have a fear as humans, you know, and it's the fear of death, obviously. But this idea that there is something bad there and we have to protect against it is so fascinating. You study such an amazing area, Debora. Can we please have you back on then when you're ready to talk about the work you're doing with Owen?
Yeah, absolutely. I can,
because I feel like this is just the tip of the iceberg. You know, there's so much that we've learned in this time. We really appreciate it. So I think we'll draw a line under this just now. Start thinking about cleaning our houses, Claire. I think this is going to go out. We're going to put this out on the 5th of January so that people have time to quickly get organised and get it together.
And also remember, on the night between the 5th and the 6th, do not listen to your pets or animals because they may tell true stories about yourself you might not want to hear.
What? So what? Hang on. Do you keep your pets outside the house? Do you just not listen to my?
No, just listen to them, Zoe. You know.
So there is this tradition again connected to the Befana and Epiphany that that specific night, animals and pets will be able to talk and predict the future and tells the truth about yourself. So the truth.
Oh my God.
And there is the story of this lady of the house who wanted to go and listen to the animals, and the servant said, no, lady, do not go to listen. Do not go into the barn and listen to the cow talk because you might not like what you hear. She went anyway, and she heard the cow predicting her death, which was imminent, and she died.
So, oh my God!
That tells you of this specific period, and also the importance of the night between the 5th and the 6th. It's a time where divination is the main thing. And that's, we have so many rituals across the world at the end of the 12 nights, or even during the 12 nights, where people do things to predict the future.
The future, yeah.
You know, because again, it's the end of a circle. So we are there at the end of the circle and the beginning of another one. Therefore, we need to know. And as you said, Zoe, why do we have so many rules? And because that's how we harness something we do not understand.
Yeah, that's such a great point to end on. I love that. That's amazing. Debora, thank you so much for joining us. We so greatly appreciate it. This has been completely amazing. I love it. So much to go and do a bit of a deep dive about now, Claire. Eh?
Absolutely. I am right on it. And this year, I'm going to take down my Christmas tree. It's still up from last year. It's probably, I mean, I've had a really good year though. So
I don't know if that's down to the tree, pal.
But
anyway, now for the second part of our podcast tonight, we are, as the modern parlance says, leaning in to the whole issue about what's happening with women politically in the world. And we're looking at what's happening in Scotland specifically with today's guest. What's happening in Scotland isn't in isolation, and we'll talk about that a wee bit more. We hinted at this in the book, or we talked about it a little bit in the book, but we'd like to look more in depth at this and what this means for us as women today, now in, I'm going to say this for the first time, 2026. It's quite weird. But anyway, so I'd like to welcome our guest for this segment, who is Gemma Clark. Gemma, can you tell us, hello, by the way, sorry, first of all, straight down to business. Can you tell us who you are and what it is you do and why it is that we've asked you to come on this episode, please?
Hi, thanks for having me. I love the podcast. So I'm Gemma Clark. I'm like Zoe, I'm a teacher, and I'm also a bit involved with abortion rights activism, and just activism in general. So yeah, teacher by trade, spinning a lot of plates just now, trying to do a master's at the same time, so keeping busy. But yeah, abortion rights activism has been quite a big thing for me over the last few years.
And it's funny because I've always been an abortion rights activist, you know, since I was in my teens, and I understood what that was, and I understood that there was some issues with, some issues, she says mildly, with women accessing their right to their own health in different ways. But I feel like in the last, like maybe 5 to 10 years, maybe longer, women have almost taken it for granted in this country. Some women. I know that there's some women that have always been on it, but I think that people have kind of gone, well, we don't have an issue with that now. It's really easy to get contraception. It's easy to get an abortion, but that's not actually the case, and things are getting a little bit tougher. So should we start maybe with a kind of a state of the nation, Gemma, of where we're at with it?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think it probably is reasonable to think that we're quite safe in this country and in the UK, but when you look into it, we're not really. Organisations like BPAS will tell you that there are constant attempts to curtail abortion rights in Parliament, and it's been a game of whack-a-mole for decades now. A lot of the amendments that they try to put through it sort of masquerades as concern for women. For example, Lord Moreland, quite recently, he wanted abortion to be all kind of monitored and treated separately from other forms of healthcare, just to make sure it's safe. You know, wink, wink, we know it's safe. We've got decades of data on that, but lots of kind of under the radar, disingenuous attempts to curtail abortion rights come up in Parliament all the time.
It sounds a bit like the Trojan horse, Gemma, of it's all about the safety of women and girls, which sounds terribly familiar to Tommy Robinson et al. You know, we really care about women.
Exactly. So where we are just now, there's been some progress in the UK recently, which is good, because when you look at what's happening in America, the situation is really precarious just now. So in the UK, there was decriminalisation quite recently. Well, it's nearly done. It's got to get through the Lords, and it probably will get through the Lords, but that's where it is at the moment. It's past Westminster. So I played a small part in that. I had a petition to decriminalise abortion in the UK. It got to over 103,000 signatures, which meant there was enough for a debate. And there were 2 MPs who were putting through amendments this year, so it probably would have got through anyway, but there were 2 different amendments. People had different opinions on what was the right one, so it meant that there was an extra 3 hours of parliamentary debate time because of the petition, which I think was useful. So that passed. It's still to go through the Lords, but hopefully it will. But at the moment,
Gemma, can I ask you what you mean when you say decriminalisation, what that means?
Yeah, so the anti-abortion lobby will tell you all kinds of horrific things, that it means like abortion up to birth, and that suddenly we're all going to wait until our due dates and then have demand an abortion just for fun, and that they'll be allowed to do that. What it just means that is, if someone is in a desperate situation and they procure their own abortion, it means that they don't get sent to prison for the rest of their life. There's been a few women recently who were on trial. There was a woman in England last year who was on trial and she could have been in prison for life. And just when the decriminalisation bill passed, there was women who had these charges against them dropped because they knew there was no point in pursuing it. But even if you, at 4 weeks pregnant, buy your own pills online and take them, you could technically have gone to prison for the rest of your life. That's how severe the penalties are.
And that's because you haven't gone through the process that you need to go through to make an abortion legal, which is the process of getting medical intervention other than your own.
Yeah, so it's not technically that it's legal, it's more that there's a legal defence against it, which doctors can use. It's sort of, technical legal jargon stuff. It's not technically legal, it was a legal defence. But now women have been removed from the criminal code. So if you, for some reason, go outside of the NHS, which people do for all kinds of reasons, it could be someone very young, very vulnerable, in a very controlling situation at home that might do that. It means that she's not facing life in prison. So that was good that that's passed, but Scotland's now lagging behind the UK in quite a lot of ways just now. So that's the next thing that we're focusing on at the moment.
So what's the position in Scotland just now? If a woman finds herself pregnant and she doesn't want to carry on with the pregnancy, what does she have to do legally to access an abortion?
So legally she has to go through the NHS. Scotland's in quite a strange position because Scotland didn't have the Offences Against the Person Act, which is law from the 1800s in the UK, which could send you to prison for life. But Scotland is under the 1960s Abortion Act, which applies to the Offences Against the Person Act. It depends what legal scholar you listen to. Some will say, well, women won't be jailed. There's other scholars from the same university that will tell you that could happen. When I was researching this for a conference, I just phoned Police Scotland and said, so if someone buys their own pills online and takes them, would that be a crime? So they weren't sure, and they got back to me and said, yeah, if that was reported to us and there was any hint of criminality, which that would be, we would have to investigate it. They said what would then happen, they don't know, but they would have to investigate the person.
Okay.
I mean, so at the moment you have to go through the NHS, and is it the case that you have to be seen by 2 doctors, or two doctors have to agree?
2 doctors need to agree to it. A lot of people don't realise that, because I've spoken to providers and they will say that, the person they speak to, they'll be a doctor and they'll be running about in the background behind the scenes trying to get that second signature. The patient isn't always aware of that. They try very hard not to make it the patient's problem so that they're not worrying about it. So a lot of people think, I don't have to get permission from 2 doctors, but it will have been signed off by 2 doctors. They just won't have realised.
But you just didn't know.
Yeah.
And can doctors refuse to give the green light to it?
They can.
Yeah.
But they don't always, and if you're in a rural area or an island where there's not a lot of access anyway, that can make life very difficult, especially when you're on a time limit.
Yeah.
So the actual law says, subject to the provisions of the Act or this section, a person shall not be guilty of an offence under the law relating to abortion when a pregnancy is terminated by a registered medical practitioner if 2 registered medical practitioners are of the opinion formed in good faith. And then it goes through the timescales, and then it says that the termination is necessary to prevent grave permanent injury to the physical or mental health of the pregnant woman, or the continuance of that pregnancy would involve risk to life, or the pregnant woman is greater than if the pregnancy was terminated, or if there's substantial risk that if the child were born, it would suffer physical or mental abnormalities as to be, it's described as seriously handicapped. Now, I don't know if those words are still in place. Gemma, do you know if they are?
Yeah, that sounds like the wording of it that I'm familiar with. Again, people who think that abortion is a right, it's not actually a right. You've got to persuade 2 doctors and it's got to fall within these limits. And technically just not wanting to be pregnant isn't really a reason why they should give you one. Most doctors will apply it quite liberally and say, well, it's going to affect this person's mental health, so I'll agree to it. But it doesn't. You don't actually have a right to have one. It's gatekept in a way that no other type of healthcare is. Well, apart from gender-affirming care, and that's the only other example that I know of. But other than that, it's very gatekept in a way that nothing else is. So in Scotland,
I mean, it's very intimidating for you. I mean, if you were pregnant and you didn't want to carry on that pregnancy, you have to go and talk about this to somebody. You probably, I mean, the way that GPs are run now, you won't know your doctor. It's not like you've necessarily got a relationship. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. But you have to talk to somebody and say to them, right, I am pregnant. I don't want to carry this on. And then probably be worrying about how you would be judged, and if you have to explain how you got pregnant, had you done something, quote unquote wrong, would you have to say that this was the result of something that was done against my will? I think that's really complicated, and you're really vulnerable in that position. And it could be somebody really, really young. It could be somebody who's maybe not as switched on with the internet, who maybe doesn't have a community they can talk to. It should be something that your doctor is a help, not hindrance.
Yeah, exactly. As you say, it could be somebody young and vulnerable, or someone that's got some sort of internalised stigma. It can be very difficult for them to go and advocate for themselves. If you don't think, well, this is my right and I should have this, it's putting a lot of barriers in the way for people.
And I know there are some sneaky ways that, and I know this from personal experience of being sitting in the doctor's surgery, just for something completely unrelated to this, and noticing, this is like maybe about 10 years ago, noticing that there were leaflets from an organisation that I knew what that organisation was. So I knew that it was for pregnancy advice. So it looks like you're having an unwanted pregnancy and they're going to help you to end the pregnancy. But I know that it was one of the organisations that you would go along and it looks like you're being offered counselling, but actually you're then going to get heavy. You cannot have an abortion. Don't do that. It's wrong. And I think that maybe, I don't know if GPs are more switched on to that now than maybe they were, or maybe that particular doctor's surgery, they believed in that and thought that was a good thing to have that there. But certainly at the time, I took the bundle of leaflets and gave it to the receptionist, said, do you realise what this is? Because I don't think that's okay. I think doctor's surgery, I think medical stuff should be like the law and like politics, and I know that it doesn't work like this, but I think that there should be no religious intervention at all in those things.
Yeah,
it's not...
It's a medical matter. There's no room for personal religion.
It's scientific.
Yeah.
I think that's what it should be.
Yeah.
So...
There's actually quite a lot of that. organisations that pretend that they're going to help people. They're actually just anti-abortion organisations. So
Yeah.
I approached one of the protesters that was picketing the hospital and said, "Well, I'm a young woman. What help would you give me if I was pregnant?" And she just handed her a number. We could see the number in the video, so I googled it, and it was an anti-abortion organisation, a so-called counselling service. So you can imagine that wouldn't be objective. They would have an agenda, and they would want to be telling the person what to do or what not to do.
Yeah, and I know what sort of imagery certainly has been used in the past to quote unquote convince women that they're doing the quote unquote wrong thing, and it's really emotionally manipulative, I mean, it'd be fair enough if these organisations, even then it wouldn't be fair enough, but it would be different if these organisations then said, right, we're going to help you financially, because a lot of women can't financially manage a pregnancy, and that's why they terminate the pregnancy, because they think I can't have another mouth to feed, or I'm homeless, or I've got a problem in this way that's going to affect that. And a lot of the time it's financial, probably now really more than just about ever in recent years. Yeah. So when you mentioned there about picketing outside the clinic, can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so during the pandemic, I became aware of these protests going on outside the hospitals. The QEUH in Glasgow, the big one in Glasgow, I used to live quite near that, so I'd seen them once and I thought, that's really strange, but it seemed to be there a lot during the pandemic when the rest of us were staying at home to save lives. These so-called pro-life people were ignoring the rules, mixing in ways that they didn't need to be mixing, and breaking the rules, putting people at risk of COVID, which was killing people. So I started following the Back Off Scotland campaign. They did an amazing job. They got the law passed on buffer zones, which means they're meant to stay 150 metres away. So that law did pass. They are now meant to stay 150 metres away, but the problem we're having now is stunt arrests. So this woman from Glasgow who's got herself arrested a couple of times, I mean, anybody who's seen that hospital will recognise her. She's a permanent fixture there. Quite often she does stay outside the buffer zone, but when she wants to be arrested, she'll stand inside the buffer zone. There will be someone there filming it, and she'll get herself arrested. And we know that she's being supported by an American organisation called the Alliance Defending Freedom. This is the same organisation who got Roe v. Wade overturned in America. So
oh my God.
There's American interference, and if they can find people who make themselves useful and get arrested on purpose, they'll then use that so that they've got a court case and they can try and pick away at the law or try and find exceptions to it, and they try and spin it as, oh, this poor little granny from Glasgow has been arrested just for silently praying inside her own head, when this is an activist, a well-known activist who is always at that hospital and who chooses sometimes to be arrested whenever it's convenient, and they've got people to.
And let's be clear about this. The people that are protesting out there, whilst on the one hand I believe in the freedom of speech, I don't think it's okay to intimidate women that are accessing healthcare. And that is what's happening. They have to run the gauntlet, don't they? Which is why there's the back off zone. So it's appalling. It's absolutely appalling.
Freedom of speech, but speech comes with consequences.
Yeah.
So and they only need 150 metres away. They can still be close to the hospital. They can have their horrible signs. They can scream and shout as much as they want. They're just not allowed to be right at the entrance where vulnerable people are going for healthcare. And also, we don't have abortion clinics like in America. It's a hospital. There's people having stillborns and miscarriages, or they've been assaulted, or they're going to visit someone who's dying, and nobody should have to run a gauntlet of protesters to go to.
Let me ask you, Gemma, do they have protesters outside the bit of the hospital where men are going for vasectomies? Because that feels like it's a similar sort of a vibe.
How strange. Ask that question, Zoe.
Yeah.
And it's strange that they've worked very hard to try and go after abortion pills, again, under the guise that it's about concern for women and how safe is it. We know how safe it is. We've got 50 years of data. Abortion pills are safer than paracetamol. They're safer than Viagra, but nobody's out protesting against that or trying to curtail men's right to control their own bodies and their own fertility. Yeah.
It's scary because, looking at what's happened in America, and there is a tie-in to the witch trials in the UK, as it is now, with what's happened in America. So one of the big red flag warnings about things getting much, much tougher for women, particularly women that don't have money and don't have status, has been what's happened with Roe versus Wade in the States, isn't it?
Yeah, so that Matthew Hale, I think it's pronounced, who was a lawmaker in the 1600s, he oversaw several witch trials and had women executed, and he was mentioned in the Dobbs case, and it was part of the Supreme Court's argument that abortion wasn't sort of rooted in American law and that it should be a states issue. So to quote a real witch pricker who had women murdered in the 1600s as part of this decision really tells you everything that you need to know.
To me, it is a crazy connection that you've got Matthew Hale, the most senior judge in England at the time, being relied on in the 21st century.
A man who had been executed.
Yeah.
I mean, it just shows that, you know, we've had a couple of reviews of the book recently, because I'm still torturing myself by reading reviews on Goodreads, which is insane. I know there's other things. It's completely bonkers. I can't help it. But there's been a few reviews recently where women reviewers, it seems, going by their name and their profile picture, have said there's no relevance. Why are you making this political about now? What's the relevance to women now? And I am staggered that any woman that has access to the internet, which clearly they do on Goodreads, is not seeing the link between women being accused of witches then and the way that women are being vilified now and the way in which they're trying to control women. You know, like one person made this point that trad wives are not not an issue. I think trad wives are a huge issue. I think anything where we're, I mean, they are absolutely a far right thing. They're a thing where it's saying
fascinating because they link into the great replacement racist conspiracy theory. So
yes.
That conspiracy theory is that the white race is being annihilated, the immigrants are coming in, and feminists are letting them do it, and they're going to breed us out. And the way to fix that is to stop white women from having access to abortions and to get them to have lots of white children. And the whole trad wife movement fits into that. They're selling it as a aesthetic, a lifestyle, and a good thing to do. And they've got young women on social media promoting this and really feeding this to young women and telling them, well, feminism's failed you. You know, you should look after you. And
it's no different.
Be looked after, but it's at the cost of your freedom and your autonomy and all.
And it's no different to a woman making her living from OnlyFans or making her living from being a pole dancer. They're all using the male gaze as a way of making money, right?
Exactly.
So it's all.
There are women who do OnlyFans and pole dancing.
Let's just be straightforward about it. That's what they're interested in, these males. And what they want with the women that are trad wives and these guys that you see now who, incels, whatever you want to call them, men that are suffering from the male loneliness epidemic, also known as arseholes. What their problem is they're not having access to the sex they want with women. So they want virgins, and they're very clear about this. They want young virgins who don't have any political views, who are happy to be at home, breed, cook, clean, service. That's all they want. That's the idea of what womanhood is. And those filthy feminists have ruined it for everybody because they're dating outside their race. They're giving up their virginity. They're not godly. I mean, can we hear the witch trials? Like, it's mental to me.
They're wanting jobs. They're wanting power.
It's completely insane. So I think for any woman in the so-called West to say, oh, this is not a political issue, this has got nothing to do with us now, really needs their head checked. You know, like anybody that has even a passing understanding of history, a passing understanding of what's happening in politics just now, can see that this is a really dangerous time where we all need to be rising up, knowing who our politicians are, knowing what the laws are, knowing where we can push to protect and where we can push to open up and have better access to healthcare. We really, really need to mobilise and not just sit back and go, well, I don't need an abortion, so like, what do I care? You know, I'm perimenopausal. I think the likelihood of me having a baby at this stage is slim. That would be horrific. But I'm still invested in the fact that I want women that can have babies protected.
Yeah, as a teacher, I feel so much responsibility to the next generation. I want the girls in my class now to have control over their own bodies when they grow up. And I don't know, apparently if you're neurodivergent, which I am, you're good at spotting patterns. And I'm a bit frustrated that lots of neurotypicals out there are not spotting the patterns. They're not seeing the parallels with history.
Gemma, I think they do. I think they do spot the pattern, but they don't care because it doesn't personally affect them. So when people say to you, oh, I'm not political, I always think, well, you're privileged that you don't need to be at the moment. But I'm going to tell you now, that's going to swing back that door that you're not bothered about, and it's going to hit you on the arse. I do think that is what happens. If the rich, and it is the rich, keep chipping away at our rights, there will come a point where the I'm not politicals will be like, well, hang on a minute, and it's too late by that point.
Yeah. As I found out in America, once you've lost rights, you're looking at decades to get them back.
Getting them back again is so scary.
Yeah,
exactly.
So
that's what
Sorry,
the danger.
Claire.
That's what the danger is. That the abortion rights are only the first of many rights that start getting chipping away. We've heard, for example, about maybe it's better that we should vote as a family unit, and as the man is the head of the family should vote. And now people are looking at that in the modern day and they're laughing. They're not going to be laughing in 5 years' time. I was going to say 10 years' time, but this sort of shit accelerates. So what happens is the rights that people are not, inverted commas, so bothered about, i.e. only affect a certain amount of the population, these come in, and by the time people actually start taking notice, we are all the way on a roll. And one of the really important things as a lawyer that I keep trying to tell people is law will not protect your rights if the lawmakers want to take them away. There's nothing like the Human Rights Act. People are saying get rid of the Human Rights Act. The Human Rights Act must stay in this country because it's one of the last bastions of protection we have.
I find that people want rid of that. Like even people who deserve to have human rights.
Exactly. Who says that they want to get rid of that act fundamentally misunderstands how precarious the situation is if we get rid of it. And quite frankly, our rights are going to keep going downhill if we don't do something about it. What can we do, Gemma? People will be listening to this thinking, how can we get involved and try and protect our rights? Can you tell us what we can do?
Yeah, there's lots we can do. I think it's important to know that we do have power. Yeah, I mean, everyone thinks I'm only just one person, but we're all just one person, but collectively
exactly
things together. And I think one of the most important things is to care about other people, whether it affects you or not. And actually, the attack on trans healthcare has been coming for a long time, and that has helped to feed into the attack on abortion care, because then you can attack things like Gillick competence, and you can take this paternalistic, oh, you're protecting women and children view. So it's all from the same playbook. It's all from the American religious right, because they consciously knew several years ago that, gay people are quite safe now, but we can shift the Overton window. They're obsessed with the Overton window. We can shift this a bit. We can go after trans people. We can demonise them. That then makes it easier to go after gay people. It makes it easier to go after women. So I think the first thing is you need to give a shit, whether it's you or not. If it's other people still matter. But when it comes to abortion specifically, and in Scotland, I've got a petition with the Scottish Parliament just now. We still don't have decriminalisation. An expert group has recommended that. It's probably not going to happen yet because we've got an election coming up, so it's going to be once the new Parliament comes in. We need to push for that. We still don't have abortion up to the legal limit in Scotland under any health board. The legal limit is 24 weeks, and that exists for good reason. It's very difficult and you can't really get it anywhere after 20 weeks in Scotland. What's happening is that people are having to go to England and get abortion care after 20 weeks. So attached to my petition are submissions from BPAS. And they've spoken to, there was a young teenage girl, she's about 16, she was suicidal. She had to go to England because she was past 20 weeks. There was a young woman from a family, because of her ethnic and religious background, she feared that she might be murdered if she was pregnant. She had to go to England. There's been really young...
And there's not a way, you can't hide that. If you have to travel, like regardless of whether you're 16 or you're, 46, if you have to travel to England to do that, then it's no longer within your control. Like it's not discreet. People will know that you're traveling. Yeah. So you can't hide that. And then that, as you're saying, at the furthest end could end up in so-called honour killing. But at the other end, it could be beaten by the partner that got you pregnant. It could be being thrown out by your parent or whatever. These are things that women and girls should have access to look after themselves. It makes me furious that in this year, 2026, we're not at a point where women can just look after their own bodies. It's got nothing to do with anybody else. Yeah, and that's why abortion is a really clever way of trying to control women's bodies. Like, apart from the obvious stuff, it's because there are people that find the notion of abortion completely unpalatable. They've got the notion of like a full-term baby, or they've got the notion of you're killing a child and all that kind of thing. That's very, very strong rhetoric. But we're largely talking about very early stage, very early stage interventions.
Abortions happen before 10 weeks, when it's very easily done with pills and it's like a heavy period. That is the vast majority of abortions. The very, very late ones, and in very rare circumstances where it's like really vulnerable young women, teenagers, children. Also, it tends to be children
who don't know they're pregnant necessarily.
Exactly, children who have been abused that tend to be these late ones, are people that have had a medical catastrophe with a pregnancy that they've wanted. So what we need to do in Scotland is support the petition to provide care in Scotland, which I've got lodged with the Parliament just now. Once the new Parliament is in, start pushing the MSPs on decriminalisation. That needs to happen. And also, don't fall for this anti-buffer zone propaganda that Christians are being persecuted and arrested in Scotland. That's not happening. These are anti-abortion extremists who are choosing to be arrested, and they're being backed up by evangelical American groups with lots of money. We need to not drink that Kool-Aid, not fall for it. The Telegraph are terrible. They're pushing this propaganda. It's coming into mainstream media now, and we need to be able to see through it. It's always the same people. We can recognise them.
Yeah. Well, it gives us a lot to think about, and I know that this is an uncomfortable and difficult conversation for many. There'll be some people that don't really think about it, haven't really thought about it before because it's not affected them. But it's something that I think that we need to think, even if I myself would not access abortion, I still don't have the right to try and take that away from other women. And I think it's something...
Yourself, would you force someone else, a girl?
Yeah, you don't have to have one. If it's legalised, it doesn't mean you have to have an abortion. It just means that other people have got access to it. And I think it's important that we're talking here about Scotland, but this is something that's an issue across the UK, in America, possibly in other countries in Europe. We'd be interested to hear what your takes are on things. But Gemma, thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been great to talk to you about this, because it is a bit of a contemporary manifestation of the misogyny from the witch hunts.
100%.
Thanks, Gemma.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that was fascinating, really interesting to look at the historical setting in Italy. And I think that's something that we're definitely going to have to revisit. I think that's really fascinating. And then to think about what it is in the modern day about being a woman too is really great. Claire, do you have anything that you'd like to inform our people that have bought scarves and things from us about?
Yes, anybody who has bought tartan. So one thing is, first of all, thank you very much. We are still, by day, just unable to believe how much support and interest it has, and how much people really get the idea of thinking about our history and wearing it as a sign of remembrance, but also resistance for the present time and all the difficult things that are going on. It fills my heart with absolute joy, and people are so kind about getting in contact, letting us know they've got it, and about spreading the word. One or two things. First thing is, it's still taking a very long time to make it. It will always take a long time. We might build up some stock in the future, but at the moment we are working still. Every order that comes in, that's a new order, and it takes time to make. So people are saying, I'll wait and I'll order at some point in the future when you've got stock. No, you have to order it now so that it comes into existence so that you can get it. So that's just one thing. It does take a time. We don't shy away from that fact. And in fact, we're not proud of it. We'd like to get everyone to just snap our fingers and get it. But as Zoe and I have said before, we're not witches, brackets, question mark now, after that Glasgow Witch episode. But anyway.
Remind me to come back to that. I want to say something about that after this.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So it does take that length of time. And there's a couple of videos, especially a video from a young filmmaker, Eva, on the website, which shows you why it takes so long. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the wooden tags. The wooden tags are meant from us to show that they are authentic Witches of Scotland tartan. You do not need to keep them on when you wear the items. And in fact, I don't. I take them off and they unscrew. So if you just unscrew it, there is a hole through the piece of wood, and you can put it like on your key ring or something of the like. So you don't need to keep it on, because some people have got in contact saying, oh no, I'm distraught, I've lost it. We didn't intend for people to keep the tags on. We just wanted them to get it so that they knew it's come from us and it's authentic. So please don't worry about that. In the future, we may consider doing something with tags and getting tags made. That's something on our 2026 list. So bear with us while that's going on. We're surfing the top of our tartan business at the moment, trying to keep on top of anything. So bear with. That's really about that. Now go back to that Glasgow Witch. What do you want to talk about?
So it wasn't specifically about that Glasgow Witch, although as a sidebar, I was saying to Claire earlier that was one of the highlights for me of the Christmas period, was doing the intentions. I really liked that. I really liked the idea of having that piece of quiet that's just me and some fire. And I was thinking, this could go two ways. Let's not go the criminal route. I'm not going to do arson, no. But it was nice to have that little ritual. Honestly, I really, really liked it. And it made me laugh, because one of the reviews that we had, so I'm going to go on about reviews again. If you've read the book, please do leave a review. It means a lot to us. And it helps other people find it too. But one of the negative reviews we got was, it was quite interesting, because the person that reviewed it said, I really liked the book, but I was left with an uncomfortable feeling because the authors made such a big deal saying that they themselves weren't witches. I would just say to that, we absolutely respect. I mean, I think we're really, really clear about this on the podcast. We really respect people that would identify themselves as being modern day witches. The point we're making with that is that we're saying that the witches of the Scottish witch trials are not the same as what we think of as witches today. So the witches, as in the legal definition, is people that are working with the devil to do the devil's bidding. That's a completely separate scenario to people that identify as witches now. Like, you know.
Absolutely. I mean, no, we love it. And in fact, you know, Geo says you have made a piece of magic. You have made a spell. She thinks that we are witches. We don't think that we're.
I think we're kind of witch adjacent, but I think, you know, being a woman is, you know, it's difficult. It's a really, really complex identity. I would never describe myself as a witch, because I'm absolutely not a witch. But I have absolute respect for people that are witches. Like, why wouldn't I? Like, you know, like this piece of work is partly about sort of noodling out the definition and saying that a modern day witch is not an evil thing. Like, you know, the idea in law in the Scottish witch trials was that it was clearly an evil thing that was happening. That's the definition that I'm always making. I don't love it when people say, oh, here come the witches when we come into the room. I don't love that. Partly because I've taught the book The Witches by Roald Dahl many times, and I don't want people thinking that I have got, like, you know, I've got like pointy feet, you know, that sort of thing. Yeah.
I slightly, you know, I don't mind so much people calling us the witches, primarily because we did start a campaign called the Witches of Scotland, and I think it's meant in a kind way. I also think people don't, you know, when they meet us, sometimes people don't really know how to react. You know, it's just an easy catchphrase to use.
I mean, I get that. I understand it. And I think it's, you know, it's worth explaining again, if people have only recently come to us, that when we started the podcast, you had this idea at the time of calling it Witches of Scotland, and that at some point, if everything's changed legally and people get their pardon, like maybe renaming the story. But if we called it Women of Scotland, nobody would have had the slightest interest in what we were talking about. Everybody would be like, oh, fucking women. So, you know, that's why it got named that in the first place. But we ourselves, not witches, and totally cool with witches. So just wanted to make that clear for that lady, in case she listens to this podcast, so she understands that we've got absolute respect for people that are witches. But I like to be, Claire will tell you, I like to be very clear about definitions like that. So I just wanted to say that. Also, I'd like to apologise again to some readers that we make a lot of footnotes. I'm really sorry that that's aggravated some people, and that they don't find us funny, and it's irritating. And also, I'd like to apologise that we've inserted our own views about what it is to be women into the story of the Scottish witch trials. Yep. Sorry that it seems irrelevant, and that our own political views have been inserted. Again, I'm actually not sorry about that, because I think being a woman is political. The end.
Zoe, I beg you. What was that review? What were we described as?
Oh, now this is very interesting. Right. So I'll be so upfront about this. I read the reviews all the time. I can't
I
help
never
it.
do.
I know
I
it's
don't
not
want
healthy. Claire's like, don't read them. I can't
no.
help it. It's a scab that I keep itching. And it's nice to get the good reviews, but you'll all understand this. It's the negative ones that you actually think about and you ponder. And one woman had written, well, I think it was a woman, it was a woman's name certainly, had written and said, this reads like two bitter old women. And I was like, how very do?
How did she
I'm
know?
not bitter. I'm energized by anger.
He said we were two bitter old women, the type of bitter old women who clap when somebody swears. I was like,
I mean, if
what?
I clapped every time some fucker swore, I'd be like a seal at the circus. Are you joking me? I am such a prolific swearer. I would
Oh,
have
dear.
exhausted myself. Anyway, but they gave us 1 star. And then the next day I went back and I saw it again, and they had removed the, some might argue, misogynistic, ageist epithet at the beginning and had given it 2 stars, but it still said that the book was rubbish and that we were essentially gobshites. Yes, we are.
We are.
We'll
Sorry
take
about that.
we'll take that. Anyway, so please, if you feel like reviewing, please review because it gives me something to make myself demented by. So if for nothing else, it's that. But thank you very much for those of you who have reviewed. We totally appreciate it.
Do you know what, ladies and gentlemen? It's because what Zoe does is she reads out the negative reviews to the ravens, whom she is trained to go sit in the branches of those people's trees and just look directly into the houses.
No, I've stopped reading out to the ravens because the ravens made it very clear to me they thought what I was doing was pathetic and needy and I needed to get a grip and stop reading reviews because you're awesome, stop being a baby. So I've stopped talking to them about it because really I could do without their judgment. You know what I mean? So I just talked to the raccoons about it because they're very revenge led. So that's
fully
different vibes.
That's what motivates them, spite and revenge.
One thing before we sign off, and this is a really nice thing. So part of what we want to do is philanthropy with what we do with the witches and looking at different charities and different ways in which we can use some of the money that we make to do cool things. And one of the things that we've done so far, we've done several things, but one of the things we've done so far is we gave a good chunk of money to the fundraiser that Claire Thomas is doing for Ghana. And then we were delighted to see the counter on that tick up and it's now reached her target, but she's keeping it open. So if you still want to give to that, please do. But what that means is that the money that's given to that campaign means the women in that particular witch camp in Ghana are going to get bedding, which I just think is a really great practical thing that we can do with our money. And Claire and I were so moved and delighted to see so many names that we know from people that interact with us, you know, by messaging or on Instagram, or we know they're podcast listeners. And we just thought it was totally amazing. So a big round of applause to all of you. You're wonderful. And the GoFundMe is still available if you want to add to it. So if you just look Claire Thomas Photographer, you'll find it.
Claire Thomas Photographer, Witches Ghana, it'll come up immediately. I looked on before we done this podcast and it's up at 8,000 something, so she's 1,000 over.
That's now, brilliant.
When we say mattresses for these women, we're not talking about, you know, these
silly posturepedics.
Exactly. Yeah. We're talking for thin plastic mattresses, but being able to get them for lots and lots of women. And she's put a wee note in about the other things that she can help women with if she can get them some things. For example, the ability to make candles. She can set people up in really tiny micro businesses to help them try and earn some money in these camps because
so
able to earn anything. So that's an extra £1,000 she's got for that. And we're just going to keep pushing it and keep trying to encourage people to keep giving to it because it's such a fantastic thing.
It's really cool. So yeah, so we're looking at things like that we can get involved with, and we can use some money to actually do effective change in places. So one of our listeners got in touch with us and recommended another charity that takes in children that have had witchcraft accusations. So we'll do a bit more research into that, and that might be something that we look at supporting too. But anyway, thank you so much for listening to this, the 80th episode. Have a beautiful day and enjoy 2026.
Goodbye.
Bye.
If you'd like to learn more about the Witches of Scotland, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for our mailing list at www.witchesofscotland.com to keep updated with the campaign. On that site, you'll be able to find how to link with us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.